Welcome to SpendLab. Today I'm going to show you how to add your first grant into your SpendLab budget. I have an Excel file attached here for a 5-year grant. So the first thing I'm going to do is set my overview to 5 years. The grant starts in June of 2021. So I'm going to drag this over to something closer to June. I'm going to have it end around June. I can specify some initial startup funds here if I want. I can type in whatever balance I want. And I can also set an indirect rate if I need to. Next, I'm going to add my NIH grant by clicking Add Funding Source, and then I'm going to name it whatever I want. For my purposes, NIH grant works just fine. The facilities and administrative rate at my institution is 55.5%, so I'm going to copy and paste that here. If it changes over time, I can set a definition down here. All I need to do is double-click wherever that change starts, and drag as far as I want. I can also drag without double-clicking. I can then double-click to create subsections and adjust them accordingly. If it's something specific, like 0.5%, I can just type it in to whatever it needs to be. And I can adjust using sliders if I want as well. I can then double-click to specify as many sub-blocks as I want. Now that I have my indirect rate set up, I'm going to want to put in how much I get from my grant each year. If it's the same amount every year, you can simply take a value, copy and paste it, drag it to wherever the grant starts, and double-click every time you get a payment. If it varies from year to year, you can have it set up like this, and then you can just copy and paste the new value at each installment. It won't rewrite what you already made. Then you can have a budget like this, where some of the values are the same and some are different. Now that I have my initial funding set up, I'm going to want to add my people, supplies, equipment, and travel expenses. I'm going to start with my principal investigator. Her name's Pamela Eisen. And Pamela gets funded through the grant during summers. She gets paid for the equivalent of 2 months, aka 3 months at 2/3 effort. So I'm going to copy and paste this in for her salary and change per year to per month. And then I'm going to add her fringe rate, which is 24.9%. I can set this up 2 ways. The first way I can do it is double-click where it starts, or just drag it through August, click this button, and type in 66.6% effort in order to allocate it. While this says 66.7, I typed in 66.67, and it will hold that decimal place in its calculation, and then select whatever source I want for the other third effort. In this case, I'll use my startup funds. Or I can start in June, drag it out, specify a % effort split. We'll keep 1/3 of it unassigned and 2/3 from the NIH grant. And then I can do the same thing I did earlier where I double click to create little blocks. And then it will remember to keep only 66.6% effort allocated to this grant. I don't know exactly where the other third effort will come from in future years, so I'm just going to keep that as unassigned for now. If her salary increases on a yearly basis, I can click here, set changing over time, and just specify a yearly increase, like 3% here. SpendLab will automatically do it for me. Her salary will then be a slightly greater amount each year. By default, SpendLab adds indirect costs. If this expense or any expense in the definitions is exempt from indirects, then you can specify no indirects. Now that I have my PI in, I'm going to add my postdoc. And Peter works 12 months out of the year at full effort on this project. He gets paid this amount per year, so I'm just going to double click at June, and I'll drag through June of 2026. I'll specify the NIH grant, and I'll change his salary to this amount per year, adding the fringe rate. If the fringe rate changes over time, you can set changing over time and do it the same way you would specify an indirect cost rate changing over time. Next, I have 2 graduate students. One of their names is Greta Simon. The other is Greg Stevens. Both of them get the same amount per year. So instead of doing the same thing twice, I'm going to create a definition for graduate student tuition. The graduate students work year-round. They make $31.8 thousand a year. So I'm going to put in their salary as 31.8K. The K will just turn into 1,000. I'm then going to drag through June of 2026 and specify my NIH grant as a funding source. Graduate students make 18.4% as their fringe rate. And I'm going to specify that this per year salary is changing over time. Even if it's not, that will still seal in the definition. Here I can add a yearly increase of whatever percentage I can, and I can also rename this graduate student salary. This means that I can add Greg Stevens' salary. Instead of being a set value that I change, or a per year thing that I specify, I can click here and I can click graduate student salary, and he'll get paid the same thing Greta does. I can also set this value for the fringe rate by clicking here, change over time, and specifying this as graduate student fringe rate. If it changes over time, I can adjust it accordingly, but because it's the same, I'll just take it and then specify that Greg Stevens' fringe rate is also the same. Then I'll add in the time he works and have his funds coming from the grant. Graduate students also often have tuition. So in this other section, I'm going to apply graduate student tuition. This currently doesn't have a definition, but I'll add one below. Tuition during the summer months is this value. So I'm going to take a value in August, and I'm going to specify that that's what gets paid. And then they pay this larger amount 3 times during the academic quarter, once in December, once in March, and once in May. I'm then going to specify what value each of these has, and it will automatically make this a repeating function. Don't worry if it goes over. It will only apply for as long as you have the graduate student working. If this increases yearly, you can also specify a yearly increase and click the check mark or click enter in order to have that applied. In this case, it doesn't increase. Now that I have all of my regular employees accounted for, I'm going to add in an hourly staff position. This is an undergraduate named Hannah Sharp. Hannah makes her money on a per hour basis. So instead of per year, I'm going to shift this to per hour. And she makes $15 an hour. The fringe rate for hourly staff is 20.7%. And the hourly staff hours vary a bit. For my first year, she's employed for 0 hours. For the second year, she's employed for 314 hours. So I'm going to drag out this span of time all the way to the end. And I'm going to double click to separate this into the second year and years 3, 4, and 5. During years 3, 4, and 5, she works for approximately 148 hours. This then equates to this amount per month for the second year and this amount per month for those last 3 years. I'm then going to assign the funding source to the NIH grant. Now that I've paid my staff, I'm going to look at my supplies. I spend about $60,000 a year on miscellaneous supplies, and at the beginning of my project, I'm going to buy 2 computers. For my miscellaneous supplies, I'm just going to double click like I have with most of my employees' salaries. And I'm going to specify my NIH grant as a funding source and write that I spend about $60K per year in supplies. My computers represent an upfront cost of $2,400. If either of these are exempt from indirect costs, I can simply specify here. I have some miscellaneous equipment as well. I'm just going to write it as miscellaneous. This accounts to a one-time purchase at the beginning of my grant, coming from my NIH grant, and a $7,000 purchase on year 2. I typed in 7 by mistake. That should be 7,000. If this isn't exempt from indirect costs, you can specify that here. Next, I'll do travel. I'll divide it into domestic and foreign, and just set a flat rate per year, starting in June and going to June. This comes from my NIH grant and represents $2,000 a year. My foreign is then $1,000. I can then add miscellaneous services. Then add my services like microscopy charges and my publications. The same way I have. I'll name my budget based on my lab, and I'll press the save button to save a file. That's it. Thanks for watching.